Kyunwoo is the black sheep of his swordsman family. He can't even catch a rabbit. But on his first day of 5th grade, he meets a transfer student and remembers his past life. He's reincarnated into the world of his favorite game, Bravehearts, and the new kid is a mid-tier boss destined to destroy the world. To prevent the apocalypse, Kyunwoo decides to become friends with her. Join Kyunwoo on his epic journey to save the world and discover what it means to be a hero. Before we go further, 99% of you are not subscribed to the channel, so please subscribe and hit the bell icon for latest updates. Our story begins with a bad ending from a game where the villainess is more complex than she seems. In a world plunged into despair, she aimed to destroy everything. This mid-level boss, known as the Witch of Calamity, was Yeon Haneul. If she wasn't defeated, every living being would perish, leading to the game's bad ending. On a sunny spring day, a new school year started for a 5th grade class. The teacher introduced a new student. The ordinary day took a turn when the protagonist noticed the new girl had faint blue fur, a round rabbit tail, and long rabbit ears. She introduced herself as Yeon Haneul. That day, after hearing Yeon talk about her hobbies, the protagonist remembered his past life. There was no time for nostalgia, though. The girl in front of him had a more mature voice, and when she expressed her hope to get along, he recalled the witch's words about the world needing to disappear. He realized that this girl was the same Witch of Calamity from the game, Yeon Haneul. He couldn't deny it and thought they were doomed. The game, Bravehearts, was one the protagonist enjoyed in his past life. It followed a boy aspiring to be the best hunter, known as the fighting spirit's apprentice, Kang Haneul. Set 200 years after a cataclysm, the game mixed science and magic, featuring monsters and hunters. The protagonist enrolled in Jungang Academy and faced multiple scenarios. Despite its seemingly typical school life plot, the game had 44 endings, most involving world destruction. Bravehearts had another issue, a soft-hearted and cowardly swordsman who never reached his potential, always running away from fights. This innocent boy, even when bullied, never fought back, frustrating the protagonist's party. That character was none other than the protagonist himself, the rabbit of the divine sword arts, Kyunwoo. The protagonist wondered why he had to be such a problematic character in his reincarnation. To make matters worse, he ended up in the same class as the dangerous Yeon Haneul. Crying under his desk, he thought he was helpless. Suddenly, the teacher called on him, surprising him in the midst of his tears. He looked at Yeon Haneul, standing shyly. He knew that in the game, Haneul became the Witch of Calamity due to the immense suffering she endured. Abandoned at birth, ridiculed, and never shown any affection, her lonely and weary life led her to this fate. Her suffering was due to being born with mutated DNA as an Ayin, a being whose appearance and DNA don't match their parents. Despite understanding her tragic story, he couldn't let the world end. The easiest solution seemed to be eliminating Haneul before she became a calamity, but he didn't want to do that. He wondered if there was another way to save her in the world. He gets an idea. His teacher tells him to pick a classmate he wants to sit next to, and if they agree, he can do so. This makes him realize he needs to change Han's perspective. As he walks towards her, he remembers that her difficult circumstances have made her resentful. But since the game story hasn't started yet, his actions might change the future. He knows that among the game's villains, Yeon Haneul has the power to destroy the world. He greets her, and she looks confused while he thinks about helping her see the world differently. He asks if he can sit next to her, thinking that if he can win her over, he will strengthen his position. She stutters, asking if he's talking to her. He knows he has 5 years until the game story starts, so he decides to become friends with Yeon Haneul before enrolling in the academy. By guiding her to a better path, he hopes to turn her from a threat into an ally. He grabs the chair next to her, sits down with a smile, and tells her they'll be partners from now on and to take care of him. He introduces himself as Do Kyunwoo, and that's how Kyunwoo became friends with the future mid-level boss. After classes end, he watches her pack her bag, wondering how to get closer to her. She asks him to stop staring, and he apologizes, embarrassed. As she walks away, he thinks he should just invite her to his house. Then he notices her small tail, and when she nervously calls him, he jumps in surprise and asks what's wrong. She asks why he sat next to her, and he says it's because he wants to be friends. She's stunned and shyly asks why. He says he just wants to be friends. Her ears perk up, and she stutters, asking why someone from a famous swordsmanship family wants to be friends with her. He silently watches her, then suddenly calls her Mong Shil and says she reminds him of a rabbit he once had, which he liked very much. She blushes and yells that she's not a rabbit, then runs to the door. He quickly apologizes, and she stops to say she'll see him tomorrow before running off. He's relieved she's not mad. As he walks down the street, he can't believe he's in the game world. He wonders why he can't see his status window if the world is still a game. He checks behind him and shouts, "Status window!" Suddenly, the system appears in front of him, and he decides to take a closer look. He's surprised to see that Duke Hun's abilities are impressive for his age, with physical strength at 37, muscle strength at 34, endurance at 32, agility at 43, magic at 30, and luck at 25. Believing that he had good skills, he couldn't understand why Kyunwoo was always bullied despite his abilities. However, he felt this was a much better start compared to his previous life. Soon he arrived at his mansion and upon entering, shouted, "I'm home!" The lady of the house, along with a maid, greeted him and asked about his day at school. He was surprised to see the lady, but he quickly hugged her. She asked him worriedly what was wrong. He knew he wasn't living his past life anymore and shouldn't think of it as a game. So he decided to fully embrace his life as Duke Hun. He told the lady it was nothing, just that he felt grateful to have her. She advised him to tell her if anything happened and instructed him to wash up while she prepared a snack before he went to the sword training academy. He said, "Okay," and ran to his room. As he walked upstairs, he knew he needed to embrace his role as Duke Kyunwoo. What he needed most was to master the Beast King style, a prestigious sword technique of his family. Like a lion ruling over all beasts, this technique was focused on the tip of the sword and was what made Kyunwoo the greatest swordsman. He then called for Mongsil, his male rabbit, and took him out of his cage. Noticing that Mongsil resembled Haneul, he thought he should completely master the Beast King style. A moment later in the training room, he noticed there were few people around and realized he was early. These sword training academies operated in several cities, and people outside the family learned conventional swordsmanship, not the Beast King style, which was why so many attended the academy. He wondered why everyone had stopped what they were doing and were looking in the same direction. There he saw Do Hyun, known as Lightning Flower. 2 years his senior and the most promising prodigy among all the Do family children. In the game, Seon is a student at Gomgung Academy who becomes the strongest swordsman after graduation and a strong ally of Do Kyunwoo. He pondered why Seon was there, but realized that being a Do family training academy, it wasn't unusual for her to be present. He hung up his shirt, knowing they would soon see each other often, and decided to focus on practicing the Beast King style. He grabbed the training sword and began positioning himself. He swung his sword and executed the Beast King style's first form, counting each repetition until he reached 10. He paused, wondering if Seon would be impressed by his practice, enjoying the exercise, when he suddenly heard someone asking, "Who is that?" One kid mocked him, while another teased if a rabbit was now practicing too. He then saw Wu Gudong, who was eating, questioning if it was really the rabbit. Wu Yundong asked why he was there so early, and Wu Dongdong questioned whether he could use his skills in a real fight, betting he couldn't catch even one rabbit. He knew these 3 identical triplets, known as the Cerberus in the game, were the kids who bullied him, spurred on by his cousin's influence. Frustrated by their presence, he realized it was the first time he couldn't focus due to their teasing. One of the triplets pressed him on why he wasn't responding. He understood that their taunts weren't the only reason he couldn't concentrate. He was also angry at himself for allowing the bullying. He remembered everything that happened to Kyunwoo in his past life and questioned why he had never fought back against their harassment. The triplets had heard him before, saying the head of the Do family must be ashamed of him, calling him a disgrace, and feeling sorry for his parents. This memory made him remember how much he hated hurting others. Dong Dong mockingly asked why he even swung his sword. Aon Dong teasingly suggested they should be his sparring partners. Knowing the human body isn't weak, Kyunwoo told them to spar lightly, as if it were a real game. A moment later, the other kids were shocked when he used his Beast King-style technique, charging and striking Godong in the stomach. Godong was thrown back, and Dongdong called out worriedly, noticing his nose was bleeding. Yeondong, stuttering, only asked what was wrong with him. Dizzy, Godong told his brothers he couldn't see well. He then told them to quickly pick up their swords and stand up. Dongdong, checking on his brother, remarked that Kyunwoo was quite strange, while Yeondong was horrified, saying Kyunwoo had changed. Kyunwoo reassured them not to exaggerate and to stand up, saying people don't die from that much. He reminded them that, having been hit by them before, he knew this. Yeondong shouted, asking why he was doing this and if he was crazy. Yeondong then reminded him that they had powerful backing and asked if he thought they'd let this slide. Kyunwoo calmly asked if they were referring to his cousin, Seongwoo, and if they thought SUU would protect them. The triplets were shocked and remembered a time when they wanted to become hunters, and SUU told them the fees for hunter education were too high. Godong mentioned they heard talents are sponsored, and Dongdong excitedly asked if that meant the fees would be free. SUU had asked if they wanted to get sponsored, and they all agreed. SUU then said he would handle it and that it was nothing difficult, but noted they were in the same school as Kyunwoo, meaning they'd see him often. Kyunwoo then told the triplets he had just been letting himself get bullied before, and that they seemed to forget he was part of the Do family too, meaning he could easily remove them from the family's sponsoring list if he chose to. He asked if they really thought SUU was the only one who could do it. The triplets were horrified, wondering how things had turned out this way. Suddenly, their teacher called them punks and demanded to know what they were doing and how many times he needed to tell them not to spar without permission. The teacher then told Kyunwoo that even if he wasn't a model member of the Do family, he shouldn't be fighting. But Kyunwoo pointed to the triplets and replied that they started it. This left the teacher confused, but Kyunwoo asked if he was expected to just stay still and endure their bullying when he was a Do just like them. The teacher then asked the triplets if they had really been picking on Kyunwoo. Initially stunned, they glanced away to think and then admitted they had started it, confirming Kyunwoo was right. They had cursed at him and Kyunwoo was not at fault. This left the teacher looking at them confused, while Kyunwoo, feeling refreshed from their admission, thought he should have stood up for himself earlier. The next day he arrived at school and walked into the classroom, wondering if he was too early. He looked to his side and saw Haneul alone, deeply engrossed in her book. He stared at her for a moment and greeted her. She shyly covered her face with the book and greeted him back. He sat next to her, determined to befriend Haneul that day. He commented that she was always early and always reading, then asked if she really liked books that much. She said yes and asked if he liked reading too. He replied that he preferred web novels, which confused her. When she asked why he joined the book club, he said it was because she had signed up. She said she understood, but then shyly asked him to repeat what he said. He playfully asked if she read web novels too. She admitted she did, but explained that she could only read the free ones since she didn't have much pocket money. Remembering that she lived in an orphanage, he decided to change the topic and asked what drama she liked. She said she enjoyed the drama Luxury House and asked how he knew she liked dramas. He reminded her that she mentioned it during her introduction. Surprised that he remembered, she wondered why he was talking to her, and if it was because he didn't have any friends either. She worried that he was only interested because she was an A and feared he would eventually lose interest. Seeing her downcast, he noticed her ears and wondered if she would mind if he asked to touch them. He realized she resembled Mongsil and got an idea. He asked if she wanted to see a video of Mongsil, and when she asked if that was his rabbit, he said he had taken a cute video of Mongsil the day before. She was interested, and he showed her the video, explaining that when rabbits are happy, they jump around excitedly in what's called a binky. She was amazed and commented on how cute Mongsil was. He noticed her rabbit ears perk up and asked if she wanted to come to his house to see Mongsil. She immediately said yes, but then hesitated when she realized what she had agreed to. He raised his little finger as a promise and suggested they go to his house after school. His face turned red as tomatoes, and she thought she should refuse because of past negative experiences. But after school, she was amazed and surprised when she saw his house, remarking that it looked like the one in Luxury House. Kyu's mother then came out and asked Haneul if she was Kyu's friend, welcoming her warmly. Kyu greeted his mother happily, while Haneul was in shock, remembering how her old friend's parents had told them not to play with ANS and warned her not to just befriend anyone. Kyu's mother told Haneul that it was the first time Kyu had brought a friend over and expressed how happy she was, encouraging her to have fun. Kyu asked his mother if she could make them tteokbokki, and she happily agreed. He grabbed Haneul's hand and urged her to come in quickly, despite knowing that Kyu's curiosity might not last. Haneul still didn't want to let go of his hand. Inside, she was shocked to see how spacious his house was. They ate tteokbokki together and played with mongsil, which made her very happy. Hours later, Kyu's father came home, announced cheerfully that he was back. Hu's mother mentioned that he was a bit late today, and Kyunwoo greeted his father, who acknowledged his tardiness, and asked why Yoon was rolling on the floor crying earlier. Upset that she wanted to see her rabbit sister too, Kyunwoo explained that his friend had come over today, but Yoon wasn't home, which is why she was upset. Kumu then approached his father and asked if they could spar after dinner. His father was initially surprised, but then excitedly said he had been wondering when he'd get to play with him, especially now that he was in 5th grade. Kyunwoo expressed his desire to see how much he had improved and also to experience actual combat. His father, taken aback, asked if he really meant actual combat, to which Kyunwoo replied yes and added that he'd like to face some real monsters. A moment later, his father asked him why he suddenly wanted to spar and told him that he didn't need to be impatient because it was not yet his time to face the real thing. Kyunwoo looked at his hand, knowing that in 5 years, he would enter the Do Family Sword Academy headquarters and inevitably face crises while solving various incidents alongside the protagonist, Kang Han-dil. For this, he needed a good grasp of actual combat. He was sure that the other kids in the Do family had already gained their combat experience, and he was far behind them. So he knew he needed to catch up now. When he didn't answer, his father looked at him and asked if it was because of the incident at the sword training academy just now. His father then seriously told him that he heard about the fight at the academy and that the kid he fought was seriously injured. However, he reassured Kyunwoo that he had done nothing wrong. Shocked upon hearing this, Kyunwoo saw that his father seemed more interested in the truth than in scolding him, but he knew that he would never fight without reason. He then replied that he had been taught from a young age that the sword from the divine swordsmanship of the Do family was meant to protect and save people, and he had taken that lesson to heart. He believed that he wouldn't have this notion if he hadn't reflected on his past life and the lessons from it, and thinking about the future had changed his mindset. He then asked his father if he shouldn't be able to protect himself and how someone who can't protect themselves could protect others. His father asked if that was the reason he fought, to which he confidently replied yes and explained that he could protect not only himself but others as well, and for that, he needed to face real monsters. His father smiled upon hearing his answer and told him that he was not wrong and his reasoning was completely valid. His father then patted his head and told him that he had changed a lot. He asked his father if he would help him, to which his father replied that he would, but there was a condition. He asked his father what it was. His father pointed the training sword at him and told him to prove that he had developed enough skill to face a real monster. His father then said he wouldn't use mana and wouldn't move more than 5 steps, so he should feel free to pounce. He asked his father about using the Beast King style, and his father replied that he would only use the basics, to which he responded that he understood. He hesitated about the conditions set by his father, but was glad that his father told him not to hesitate to use the sword if necessary. His father then teasingly told him to attack, and he decided to do exactly as his father instructed. He exhaled to calm himself and positioned his training sword. He then swung his sword at his father, who easily blocked it without moving, causing him to be thrown off balance a little. But he managed to land perfectly. He bent his knees, jumped high, and attacked his father again, but his father blocked it once more. His father pushed him back slightly, saying it wasn't going to work, but he quickly launched his sword and swung at his father, who jumped away to dodge it. Seeing his father land, he knew it was the perfect moment to strike again. But his father blocked it. As his father began to speak, telling him he was going to use something, he struck his father on the side, cutting him off mid-sentence. His father looked at his side, surprised to see he had been hit. Jumping away and holding his side in pain, his father called him a brat and admitted that while he allowed the hit, it was a strong one. Exhausted, he asked his father to acknowledge his skills, but his father just said he'd grown up and didn't hesitate to hit his own dad. Laughing, he asked if he passed, and his father shouted affirmatively, calling him a rude kid. The next morning, his father told his mother they would be leaving and should return before dinner. His mother, worried, asked if he was sure about sending Kyunwoo, questioning if Kyunwoo was too young. Yoon, his sister, shouted that she wanted to go too. Both he and his father were surprised by his mother and sister's reactions. His father assured his mother it would be fine, and he agreed. His mother warned him to be careful and not overdo it. He replied that he would be back later and told her not to worry. They got into the car, and his father asked if he was ready to head to the clan academy. He answered yes, and his father started driving. He remembered that in the game, the world had become unstable since the Calamity change, causing monsters to pour out from distorted dimensions and transforming areas into dungeons. When different worlds' distorted dimensions meet, a gate is created. He knew that if this phenomenon wasn't resolved in time, the world inside the gate would explode and scatter into reality. An outbreak occurs when the world in the gate explodes and spills out, differing from regular dungeons. Failing to conquer it within the time limit would significantly affect the game's ending. To reach the desired outcome, they also needed to monitor the gate erosion rate, crucial for character growth. His thoughts were interrupted when his father suggested they grab the key first. After arriving, he asked his father where the gate was, and his father said it was kept in the warehouse. He knew that clearing a gate awarded a gate key for future re-clearing, a feature for players wanting to reattempt gates. He wondered if this setting still applied after his reincarnation. Soon his father stopped the car and said they had arrived. They got out, and his father introduced him to his workplace, the Regulus clan. The Regulus clan was established during the catastrophe by the first head of the DU family and now has several branches across the country. Normally, access to dungeon gates and monster habitats requires a hunter's certificate. He knew he shouldn't be able to enter the gate without a certificate, but his father's position as branch manager and the warm greetings from employees made his situation unique. He thought he didn't need to follow those restrictions strictly and could enter the gate with his father's help. Suddenly, he heard someone shout excitedly, and a hand grabbed him. A lady hugged him and asked if he was their manager's son. The other employees surrounded him, happy that he looked innocent. They were glad he didn't resemble his father. One employee pinched his cheek, saying how cute he was and that they wanted to hug him tightly. Moments later, he was showered with kisses by the staff. The lady then asked his father if he planned to enter the gate with his son. He wondered if all hunters were this affectionate. The lady told his father they should go to room 2 as planned, and his father agreed. Confused, he noticed the key they received was white and asked his father about it. He remembered the gate's difficulty levels were marked by different key colors, starting with white for the easiest and black for the hardest. His father explained that white would be challenging enough for him. He replied that he understood, but secretly wanted to try the gray level. His father opened the gate and told him it was time to go in. Inside, he saw another gate, and his father explained it was an artificial gate. If they inserted the key obtained from clearing a dungeon, the gate would open. He was amazed and thought about how his family maintained a large clan, realizing their power. His father then called him over and asked if he was sure he was ready. He advised him to think it through because once inside, they couldn't leave until the dungeon was cleared. He looked at his father and confidently replied that he was ready. His father smiled worriedly and before inserting the key, asked if he would help if he couldn't clear it. His father assured him that he had his back and told him not to overdo it and get them in trouble with his mother. His father activated the gate and it slowly opened. Entering, he saw crystals shining brightly and looked around in awe. It was his first time in a gate. The system notified him that he had entered the White Level's Pink Crystal Cave with a mission to eliminate 15 goblins, ranked 0.1. He wondered if the conditions were simple because it was a White Level gate and asked where the goblins might be. Suddenly, he heard a sound behind him, drew his sword and positioned himself cautiously. He was surprised to see his father in front of him with the goblins tied up. He ran over and asked if his father had captured all the goblins. His father confirmed they were all there, and he counted 15 goblins. He calmed down and told his father he was ready. His father said they should start with one since he couldn't handle them all at once. His father approached the smallest goblin, warning him not to be careless despite its size. But before he finished, the goblin broke free in anger, surprising his father. The goblin rushed at him, and he asked his father if this was what he meant by their fierceness. His father agreed and reminded him not to forget it. He knew from games in his family's divine swordsmanship (DU) training that monsters understood their only chance to survive was to fight. The goblin grabbed a sharp crystal, making it clear it was desperate enough to use it as a weapon. He knew he had to be cautious because a small mistake could be disastrous. He bent down, thinking that since this was a real fight, he should give it his all. He then activated his Beast King style's basic technique, fifth form piercing stance, and thrust his sword at the goblin's head. The sword pierced the goblin's head, and it fell to the ground, dead. His father sighed in relief. Gripping his sword tightly, he proudly declared that one was down. As a party member of the main character Kang Hanbyul, Do Kyunwoo had a restriction. In the game, there was a feature called Gift, and among the passive skills defining the character, Do Kyunwoo's gift was Evasion Instinct. At first glance, it seemed like a useful ability. His father then released two goblins, and as they faced him, he reflected that Evasion Instinct was literally the ability to instinctively move to avoid attacks when sensing a life-threatening crisis. While it appeared useful for Do Kyunwoo, who wielded a sword, his fearful and fragile character often led him to disobey commands, making the gift more of a hindrance. Because of this, players generally didn't include Do Kyunwoo in their party unless it was unavoidable. The evasion instinct also caused him to defy player commands, leading to frustration. However, there was an event in the story that triggered Kyunwoo's awakening later in the narrative. Kyunwoo gained control over his gift. After the awakening, a character who awakens late becomes a remarkably strong morale booster, and Kyunwoo demonstrated his overwhelming ability to defeat enemies by avoiding most of their attacks. He remembered that raising Kyunwoo well could make the later part of the game easier, but he knew it was still a long way off and waiting would be too late, so he couldn't just sit still. The goblins growled at him in anger, and he stared back at them, knowing he needed to advance his awakening. He thought it must be possible to awaken early. He then jumped closer to the goblins and swung his sword, determined to push himself to the limit. Later, many goblins lay dead on the ground, but he told his father to release the next one. His father suggested they take a rest, but he replied that he was fine. His father sighed and said that if he insisted, they should face all of them. The last four goblins stared at him angrily, and his father released them all. The goblins rushed at him, but they all jumped behind him, catching him off guard. He looked around, wondering if it was a diversion tactic, and noticed that two of the goblins were above him, but he couldn't locate the other two. Suddenly, he felt something approaching from behind. He let his body react for a moment, and his gift, Evasion Instinct, swiftly moved him to the side. Someone from behind tried to hit him, but he avoided it, and it struck the crystal in front instead. He was stunned to realize that his body had moved without his conscious will, indicating that his gift had activated. Knowing that the evasion instinct had sensed the crisis, he resolved to trust that instinct. He then positioned his feet, ready to deal with the goblins. Thanks to his gift, he managed to spot where the four goblins were hiding and swore he wouldn't fall for their trick again. One of the goblins threw another crystal from behind, but he reassured himself it was fine since his evasion instinct was activated. He dodged the crystal, shocking the goblin who threw it. He jumped, using the crystal to reach a goblin that was trying to shoot him with arrows. With a swift slash, He cut the goblin in half using his Beast King style's second form. When he looked behind him, he was surprised to see more goblins waiting at his landing spot with a sharp crystal. That is all for today. If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. The next part gonna be uploaded when this video gets 100 likes. Till then, bye.